In recent months, federal judges have pushed back on the actions and policies of President Trump, which has led to tension between the executive and judicial branches of government. With us now to share his thoughts on the dangers of toxic polarization is Judge Thomas B. Griffith, formerly a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, currently with Hunton Andrews Kurth Law Firm in Washington, D.C., and a lecturer on law at Harvard and a fellow at the Whitley Institute at Brigham Young University. Judge, quite a bunch of titles there. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I guess our first question.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, good. I guess our first question then, Celeste, you wanted to take this?
Yes. So, Judge Griffith, what role, just so we can understand when we go into this, what role does the federal judiciary play in upholding constitutional law when contempt is being used in place of reason and civil argument?
That's a big question, big topic at this moment. From the earliest days of our republic, we've decided that the courts will play the primary role in determining what the law means. Congress makes the laws, the executive branch carries out the laws. It's the courts that end up deciding what the laws mean and what people can do within the law and what they do that's against the law. So that's a distinctive role the courts have played. In my view, what we're seeing playing out with the courts is exactly what's supposed to happen. You have strong and passionate arguments about the role of the president, what he can do, what he can't do, and they're being played out in courts where reasoned disagreement, reasoned argument reigns. In fact, I think the courts provide something of a role model for how the rest of us ought to be engaged in our political discourse. We have passionate disagreements. That's good. We're Americans. We disagree about things. That's really good. But we need to do it in a way that shows respect for the people with whom we disagree, and that we bring reasoned argument and not just contemptuous attacks.
Well, sir,
that's what's happening in the courts right now.
Sir, this is Frank Billingsley. You're absolutely right. But what recourse is there when a judge's order to turn the planes around is ignored, and when the Supreme Court 9-0 order to facilitate the return of one of those deported is ignored? That message to America as a whole is frightening.
Well, I want to be careful here because that's one characterization of what's taken place, but that's a contested view, right?
Right.
There's an argument about what does the word facilitate mean, right? And the Trump administration has taken one view of what it means to facilitate. Others have taken another view. That's going to play out in the courts. We're going to see what does that language mean in the courts. And so that story isn't finished yet, right? We're midway through it. We're midway through that process. Let's wait and see how this particular controversy plays out to see what that happens.
Judge, let me ask you this then, too, in staying with what you're talking about and get more philosophical about it. What fascinates me is that the Supreme Court can issue a ruling, a decision, and it seems like then they throw it back to us to interpret what they've said. In case of a word like facilitate, there doesn't seem to be a back and forth, and I'm sure that's there to preserve the authority of the judge, of the bench. But shouldn't there be some way to have a more casual way of coming back and saying, you use the word facilitate, is there a better definition you can give us? Am I misunderstanding how that works?
No, I don't think you're misunderstanding it at all. In the case you're talking about, this is the deportation of the alleged Venezuelan gang members, and particularly Mr. Garcia. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court ordered the Trump administration to facilitate his return, and then sent it down to the trial court, the court that had the case in front of it, to say, okay, carry this out. And now there's an argument about, well, what does that mean, facilitate? Right. That may be a case where the Supreme Court maybe was a little too vague in its language. But what I want to point out is maybe it's a frustrating process, but it's actually a pretty good process. It's now we're now going to find out what they meant by
But can the lower court simply request clarification from the Supreme Court without it having to go through an appeal process that goes back up to the court?
No, that's typically not how it's done.
Right. Why?
That's typically not how it's done. So, because there are lots of reasons for why a lower court can't ask the court above it for guidance apart from deciding the case itself. But that's the system that
we seem to have a bad connection. We're going to go ahead and let Judge Griffith go, and we're going to get him back on a phone line so we can continue this conversation.
Judge Thomas Griffith, formerly a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, is back with us on the phone. And, sir, you were talking about basically everybody doing their job.
Judge, can you hear us?
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
And we were just saying when we were waiting for you to call in, if people that are in the legislative, judicial, and executive branches don't do what they're supposed to do, we have a constitutional crisis.
Well, that phrase "constitutional crisis" is used an awful lot.
Especially by me.
I shy away from using it in most instances, but. And I don't think we're in a constitutional crisis right now. I think the system is playing out just as it was designed to play out. And I know it's hard for all of us to sort of be patient and let the courts do their work. But I have a great deal of confidence in the federal judiciary, and I have a great deal of confidence that they are not partisans. These aren't issues of whether they're for Trump or against him. They're wrestling with difficult legal issues and trying to come up with the best resolutions to this. Which I think is why I was hearing you. Which I think is why when people say the court is somehow illegitimate or that you have a judicial insurrection going on or a judicial coup, first of all, that's inaccurate. That's not what's going on. And second, it does great damage to the Constitution because it diminishes the public's faith in what is actually happening in front of the federal courts, and that is tough issues are being litigated and being resolved by judges who are doing their best to get the right answer, regardless of whether it helps President Trump or hinders him. I got to say, from my experience in the federal courts, that is not how judges think, and hopefully that's not how they act, and most of the time they don't. Every once in a while somebody slips up.
Well, sir, due process is not difficult to understand. If anything, most Americans understand that explicitly, and they know when it's not happening.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court in the last couple of weeks has unanimously said that due process has to be afforded in these cases.
It's the mainstay. Remarkable. It's the mainstay of our democracy. If you even if you just get pulled off the street, you still have a right to go before a judge and make your case.
That's right. That's kind of fundamental. And again, this court, Roberts Court, 9-0 on 2 occasions to send. So I think we're in shape there.
Judge, let me ask this. Just kind of curious, in the grander scheme of things, when a decision comes down from a higher court, and especially at this level, and it is ignored, without the judiciary branch having any sort of an enforcement group to go out and enforce their rulings, what happens if it's just decided to ignore what the judiciary says?
Yeah, what then?
Well, that's when you have a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, let's not throw that term around.
We use the phrase constitutional crisis. But I do want to push back a little bit on the suggestion that's what's happening right now. I don't think we're there yet.
Right.
There's been some creative lawyering, shall we use I'll use that phrase to be generous, creative lawyering. But look, the president has said repeatedly, I'll obey the Supreme Court. So
but I guess my question is, what are the gears that get the levers that get pulled if in fact we get to a point where decisions aren't being followed? With how does the judiciary enforce it then? I'm just curious from a civics class point of view.
Yeah. So the only mechanism, well, in this case, there are two mechanisms that it has, but one of them is a dead letter. One is the impeachment clause, right? And this is what the framers had in mind. If you had an executive that was just disregarding the law, the framers said, well, we've got this great, impeachment provision, but that's been rendered a dead letter in the last 20 years or so. That's not a viable option. The other one is to hold the executive branch in contempt of court. But here's the problem there. To enforce that, you have to have a prosecution. The prosecution is done by government lawyers.
And he has appointed them.
It's hard to imagine it's difficult to imagine a situation in which a Justice Department would be willing to prosecute the President of the United States for contempt, or members of the executive branch for contempt.
So what you're saying is there's no answer. There is no recourse.
That's why I call it a constitutional crisis, right?
So if we get to that point,
so we circle back to what I said originally. But
before we say the sky is falling, we don't have any instances of this ever happening, right? I mean, when Nixon lost the White House tapes case, what did he do? He turned over the tapes, right? When George W. Bush lost the Guantanamo Bay cases, what did he do? He followed what they said, even though he disagreed with it. When Vice President Gore was ruled the loser in Bush v. Gore, what did he do? He went along with it. That's what. Well, there's a great tradition in America that no, you do follow the courts, and I'm counting on that to happen. My personal view is there's a lot of political bluster that's going on around this issue, but that when the tire meets the road. Again, the president has said, I'm going to obey the court. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed and
let's hope that he doesn't blame it on Bucali and say, well, President Bucali won't let this guy go, so there's nothing I can do about it. Because we gave these people $6 million to take our deportees. We can certainly say, give us our money back if you're not going to do what we say.
When we get to that issue, there are limitations on what the judiciary can do with respect to what takes place in a foreign country and foreign policy. That's a tougher issue than some people are willing to make it. But let's see. I'm as interested as anyone to see what did the Supreme Court mean when they said the Trump administration has to facilitate the return.
And by the way, they've said you have full immunity. So it will be interesting. You're absolutely right to see what they say after giving this president full immunity.
Judge, yeah, please.
Full immunity for core presidential actions, but not full immunity beyond that.
Okay.
Judge, I often say I hope I live long enough to read all the definitive books written about the periods we're living in. Thank you very much, Judge.
Thank you.